Hello, I'm Pravir Malik, and today I'm going to briefly present the role of a light-based quantum computational model in the creation of an oscillating universe. This presentation, prepared as a backup presentation for the conference, IEEE 12th Annual Computing and Communication Workshop and Conference, is based on the paper by the same name. In this paper, the gist is essentially to connect cosmic expansion contraction dynamics to quantum computation. It's driven by the dilemma due to contradictions about the origin, life cycle, and fate of the cosmos. In this paper, the way this is resolved is by assuming that the cosmos is an instance of a complex adaptive system and therefore subject to dynamics of emergence. The mechanism by which expansion contraction dynamics links to quantum computation briefly is the following. So we have a light-based quantum computational model that creates something called quantization. And the result of this persistent computation is genetic type output. When that's combined with species capacities, it can create a state of quantum certainty that can result in fourfold adaptation that feeds back and alters space-time energy-gravity quantization because it's a single complex adaptive system and therefore create an oscillating universe. But going into it in a little more depth, in the next few minutes, I'm going to briefly present the quantum computational model of light, talk about the notion of quantum certainty and fourfold adaptation, delve a little bit into space-time energy-gravity quantization, and then come to the idea of an oscillating universe, finally offer a summary and conclusion. The quantum computational model of light is captured in this matrix. And if we look into this, there's several layers of light that are imagined to exist at different speeds. So we have a layer of light that's considered to be the native state of light, where light travels infinitely fast. And because of that, that light is present everywhere instantaneously, so has a property of presence. It can overpower anything else that emerges and therefore has a property of power. It records all appearances and disappearances in its fabric and therefore has a property of knowledge. And since everything is connected in its fabric, there's an implicit property of harmony. Now, this fourfoldness cascades symmetrically into each subsequent layer of light as a light is projected at lower speed due to an act of quantization. These four properties display or show more of what is contained within them. So it gets further objectified or in a sense materialized. And so what we have is presence, power, knowledge, harmony due to this quantization, becoming a set of presence, a set of power, a set of knowledge, and a set of harmony that practically has as many as infinite elements inside each set that are all related to the primary property of presence, power, knowledge, and harmony. Due to another quantization, as light projects itself at an even slower speed, there's a further objectification that takes place so that there are, in effect, infinite number of subtle seeds that are created. And these seeds are a function of essentially the unique elements combined in unique ways from each of these four sets. And that's captured by this mathematical notation here. When light projects itself at 186,000 miles per second, referred to as c to the base u, there's a final act of quantization, which creates space-time energy gravity. And the way to think about this is that because there are infinite number of seeds, materially, they require an arena in which to play, and that arena we can call space. Each of these seeds will have a different rate of maturity, whereby what's contained within it will become objectified. And that refers to this notion of time. The act from changing from a subtle state into a more concrete materialized state is accompanied by energy. And therefore, there's a property of energy that comes into being. And there's a relationship between seed and seed and seeds, and that we can refer to as gravity. Now, when light projects itself at 186,000 miles per second, in this model, there's something called a steg fabric that's created. And the steg fabric essentially becomes a repository for all kinds of steg scripts that capture the essential dynamics of anything that emerges in this complex adaptive system. So be it the electromagnetic spectrum as something subtle and then becoming more and more material and objectified, quantum particles, atoms, molecular plans, and so on, these all, because of the mechanism of Steg strips, get recorded in the Steg fabric. And I've explored this in some detail in a number of related papers that have also been referenced in this paper. Now, coming to the idea of quantum certainty and fourfold adaptation, we start with this matrix of light. And this matrix of light, since we just said that space and time are, in a sense, emergent from this layer, a way to understand what's happening in space is by mapping a one-to-one relationship between each of these layers of light to how it can influence what's happening at essentially the material level that is referred to as U. So there's a set of different dynamics that can become active in space based on conditions that are broken, that are represented by the quantities in parentheses. And that can change what happens in space. And essentially, when we project or see how things emerge in time, we can see also that each of these meta layers that themselves come from these layers of light have a different time of activation, and that's captured by this matrix. Now, when we think about the idea of quantum certainty, essentially, let's consider the example of an insect that perhaps has many predators, and there's an urge to protect itself. Now, if that urge is strong enough, it can create a state of quantum certainty, because it can, in a sense, open a quantum window into layers behind the physical apparent layer and activate dynamics that exist at deeper layers within the space and time matrices. And these, of course, once these are activated, then the mathematical idea that's represented over here becomes active. And the way that that becomes active is that the insect, perhaps in its urge to protect itself, might develop a hard protective shell. And this protective shell can be thought of as summarized by this equation here, where you have a primary element X and a secondary element Y, which derives from some functional elements as captured in these large sets over here. And that's also summarized over here. And so you have, for example, in this case, you see the primary element being an element from the set of power. And if we think about at the cellular level, then power can be related to polysaccharides that are chains of sugar that can, in fact, become a protective shell, a hard protective shell. But then also there's the action of proteins, nucleic acids, lipids, and other polysaccharides that would have to be mobilized as well to make this protective shell a reality. And that's what's captured here. So that's the idea of quantum certainty and of the fourfold adaptation, because over here, what we're saying is that once quantum certainty occurs, then there's essentially a fourfold adaptation along each of the dimensions of presence, power, knowledge, and harmony. Now, when we think about space-time energy gravity quantization, the act of fourfold activation is going to further cause space-time energy gravity quantization. And so when that insect is adapting, then there's a specific script that gets written in the Steg fabric. And these have four components. There's due to space quantization, time quantization, energy quantization, gravity quantization, where the essential idea behind the function is captured by a script and recorded in the Steg fabric. The macro effect of many of these changes is that there's going to be a larger impact on the Steg fabric, and that in itself is then going to change the nature of space and bring about an oscillating universe. So in this model, the idea of dark energy, we know, for example, that visible matter is 5% you have about 20% being dark matter, and dark energy being 75% of the makeup of the universe, hypothetically. But in this model, the idea of a manifested set is captured by this idea of dark energy. And so, as we've seen, what's referred to as manifested set is essentially the four properties of presence, power, knowledge, harmony, and the sets associated with them as they materialize and are recorded in the STEG fabric. Then that increases the manifested set for along each of those dimensions. And the complexity of matter itself is related to that. But essentially, there's a threshold level. And if the manifested set is growing above a certain threshold, then the macro effect is going to be that we'll observe an acceleration of galaxies that will be greater than the in-pulling gravity of the universe, and therefore we'd have an expanding universe. On the flip side, if the manifested set is growing at a rate lower than the threshold, then you're going to have the acceleration of galaxies that is less than the in-pulling gravity of the universe, and the universe is essentially going to begin to collapse. Now, summarizing, when you look at the micromechanics, as I said, there's the light, space, time matrices, and due to an urge that is strong enough from any species, we of course look specifically at the insect in this example, but imagine that these urges can belong to any kinds of species. It can create a state of quantum certainty that brings about fourfold adaptation. In this state of quantum certainty, different dynamics become active that we can see what those dynamics are based on light, space, time notations that are summarized over here. And this can result in specifically in fourfold adaptation, whereby there's changes to the manifested set along each of the dimensions of presence, power, knowledge, and harmony. The effect of a lot of these changes, if there's lots of different urges that create quantum certainty, is that the dynamics of space-time, energy, gravity themselves will begin to change due to the many acts of quantization, the space-time, energy, gravity quantization. And that's going to, at the macro level, make matter more complex, and the manifested set is going to exceed the threshold level associated with dark energy. And as a result, the universe will expand in this case and contract in this case. Now, the conclusion here, or the corollary, is that so long as urge for improvement or for change occurs at a deep enough level so that quantum certainty is happening, then the universe will expand unendingly. And this has to be in a case where you consider the cosmos to be a single complex adaptive system. Thank you.